All right, let's take a look at a small web application written in JavaScript. This is jQuery FAQ. So jQuery is a JavaScript framework that we'll be looking at more in later chapters. But this is a little FAQ application. Let me refresh it. So when it starts out, if you notice, this is highlighted in blue. This first element is highlighted in blue. We have some plus signs here. And when I click on the words or a plus sign, the plus sign changes to a minus, and then some words appears answering the question for that FAQ. So when I click on jQuery, it says jQuery is a library of the JavaScript functions you're most likely to need as you develop websites. So we're learning how to write all these JavaScript functions, but then there's a library out there that we can use called jQuery that has a bunch of them written for us. We still need to understand how they work. So later on, we'll learn how to use jQuery to simplify some of the things we're doing. When I click on these other items, they also expand. They change to a minus side. 3 reasons to use jQuery. Why use it? Because it's free. It lets you do more in less time because we don't have to write all these things from scratch. And it's cross-browser compatible. Which is harder to learn, jQuery or JavaScript? For many things, jQuery is easier to learn and use than JavaScript, but remember, jQuery is JavaScript. Somebody just put a lot of the things that we do all the time in JavaScript, put them in a library so we don't have to rewrite them every time we want to do them. Okay, so this is how the app works. I've got the plus and minus signs. I can click, make things appear, disappear. Notice when I hover over any of these, they turn blue. When the page started, this one started out with a box around it and it was blue. So let's go look at how this application actually works. So let's go over here and look at the index.html. We'll look at the HTML for this page. So basic page layout, we have a body. The main section has an ID applied to it called FAQs. We have an H1 for jQuery FAQs. That's right here. We have H2 for what is jQuery, a div with a paragraph in it. And jQuery is a library of the JavaScript functions. We saw that once we expanded it. So notice everything that's on the page, even though it's not visible right now, here it is visible. When the page started out, it was not visible. But all the content is here. The H1, the H2, each H2 for each question has a div. And inside the div, it has some content. This one has a paragraph, an unordered list with those bullet items. Here's the third one. It has a div with a paragraph telling about which one is harder to learn. And then that's the end of our main page, and we have a link to our JavaScript. Okay, so that's the HTML for this application. Let's take a look at the CSS that's available to us. What's in the CSS file? Because that really matters in this one, because we're making use of a lot of these. So we have our paddings and our margins reset to 0. We have our body fonts set, the width of our page. That's pretty inconsequential. We have our H1 font size set, our H2 font size, paddings. Notice the cursor is set to pointer. So when I go over in H2, I switch from my mouse right here, which is just an arrow, and it switches to a pointy finger. So that's interesting. H2s have that. And then we have a class called dot minus that's only applied to H2. So it's H2 dot minus. Okay. H2 with a class of minus set on it. And that changes this background image. So we have an H2 with a background image that's set to a plus sign. So there's a plus PNG file in an images folder. You can see that over here. There's a plus and minus image. Okay. So the H2 by default, I shouldn't say by default, the way it's set right now, has a plus sign next to it, but we have an H2 minus that changes it to a minus sign. No repeat, aligned to the left, which makes it look like an icon out in front of our words. We have some text decoration set to none for our anchor tags, for our links. And we'll see how that's used in a little bit. We also have for our A for focus and hover. So if our focus is set to a certain link, its color will be blue, and we saw that. Right now that has the focus set to blue, but also if I hover over it, it changes the color to blue. Okay, so these classes are going to become important. We have divs. For a div, the display is set to none. So that's why our divs were hidden. The display was set to none. And then div.open, the display is set to block. So we have all these different classes we can apply. We're going to apply some classes. We're going to take other ones away, depending on what the user does. Then we set some paddings and margins. Those are pretty inconsequential, but other than making our page look nice. So now let's go look at the JavaScript for this application. All right, not very much JavaScript. This is it. Okay, use strict. You should always have use strict in your code. When the document loads, we have our DOM content loaded. We're going to do some things. Once the DOM gets loaded, we are going to go out to our FAQs, .query selector all, and we're going to get all of the H2s that are within the ID of FAQs. So we're going out and getting a reference to all those H2 elements, and they're being stored in an array. So query selector all returns an array, and we're going to use this H2 elements. Now has a list of all the H2 elements on our page. All right, now we have a small for loop. For each H2 element that is stored in H2 elements, so for each of those things, we are going to add an event listener that takes them. Anytime anybody clicks on one of those HTML elements, it's going to run the function called toggle. And that function is up here. We're going to look at it in a minute. Okay. And then the last thing this does is set the first HTML element, the first H2 element, I should say, item 0, gives it the focus, which is why when our application first loads, if I refresh it, we have focus set up here and it's already blue. Okay. So DOM content loaded gets all the H2 elements and adds them all to the same event listener called toggle. Adds it to all of them. So when somebody actually clicks on one of those HTML elements, one of those H2 elements, I'm sorry, when they click on it, what happens? The toggle event runs. And the toggle event does these things. It takes the event and finds the current target. Okay, event.currentTarget. That tells us which H2 element was clicked on. Remember, there was 3 of them. Okay, so this gets a reference to the one that was actually clicked on. Current target gets a reference to the item that was actually clicked, and we're storing it. So now we're working with one of the H2 elements, whichever one triggered this event. Okay, and then we're looking at that H2 element, and we're getting its next element sibling. Okay, if you remember, inside each of these H2 elements, okay, here's our H2 that we clicked on. Its next sibling element would be the div. Okay, we have an H2 followed by a div. We have an H2 followed by a div. So these divs would be the next sibling element. Okay, so we're finding its next element. We're finding that div and storing it in this constant called div element. And then we're taking the H2 the H2 element, the first thing that we got, the one that was clicked on, and we're toggling dot minus for its class list. Remember, in our CSS, we have H2 dot minus. So we're toggling this class, H2 dot minus. We're turning it on, which changes the background to a minus sign. Okay. And then we're looking at the div element, and we're toggling its setting. We're adding the open class. Now let's go back to our CSS. The open class changes the display to block when it was set to display none. So it was hidden, and we toggled this class on, and it changes it to block. Okay. So turn on the minus sign, open up the element. Okay. And then prevent default. Why are we preventing default? Because an A tag wants to, it's a link, right? It wants to do a hyperlink, and we don't really want it to take us anywhere. We just want for the minus side to pop up and for the div to open up. Okay. If somebody clicks on the same thing again, minus and open are applied, it toggles them back to off. And I can see that here. When I click on it, the minus sign gets set here instead of the plus. That toggled on the minus class. Okay, and for the div, it turned it on to the open class. And when I click on it again, it toggles off the display of open, and it toggles off the display of minus and changes it back to the plus. So that's a pretty neat thing to do. Very, very little code to make that happen. Showing and hiding elements on our web page. It's something that's very, very common for us to do.